you are a divine being, your energy, which means you are everything and everywhere, right? In other words, you're not like a little bit of Rumi. You're not just a drop in the ocean. You're the entire ocean in a drop. And so you are all of reality. And so if you are all of reality, there's nowhere to go because you are everything. And so I think it's really important for people to understand and live as that you are already their energy. It's a whole different energy. And from there, you can literally start to create any game that you want, right? And even in spirituality, right? People they don't realize they're in the game of not there yet. I need to unlock all of my chakras. I need to have my Kundalini awakening. I need to do another plant medicine to get it's still the you're not there yet energy. And so when you start to live like I'm already there, now your vibration feels completely different. You're just now exploring what is versus trying to get somewhere. And I think that concept needs to be spoken out because it dictates everything. That's the outer doll. You can do the Hermetics, you can do all kinds of spiritual things and do all the things, but if you're still operating within the outer doll of you're not there yet, guess what? You're always going to feel not there yet.
Before we begin, introduce yourself, share a little bit about your experience, who you are in a nutshell, and then we'll dive deep into the conversation.
Sure. Yeah. I feel like so many people that I know that are on this path began with some type of, I call it energetic constriction of their childhood, right? And that was the same with me. Basically, when I was 14, I was like sick of being sick and like literally held a knife, contemplated suicide. And then this voice, and just to let everyone know, I've had this voice come in. First memory was 5. And so this voice came in and it said, don't do it. And it specifically said, Martin Luther King and Bill Gates are no different than you. They just think differently. And so I embarked on this journey of how to think. And so I started reading books on, programming your subconscious and how energy works. And then at age 16, someone gave me the Bhagavad Gita, which is like my first spiritual text. And so really in the last 36 years, I've been on this path of understanding how does the mind, body, and spirit work. And along the way, I've treated 9,000 patients, had a clinic where we did physical therapy, functional medicine, fitness, wellness, massage, yoga, all the things. We were kind of doing what I call bio-loving instead of biohacking. We were doing that way before that was a term. And about 17 years ago, so this was maybe 12 years into practicing already, I got a massage from one of our massage therapists. And a minute later, I was in New Jersey at the time. And a minute later, I got a text message from a friend in Texas. And the message said, "How was your massage?" And I was like, "How do you know I just got a massage?" And her answer was, "Your soul told me." And so ever since then, I was like, oh, clearly the esoteric spiritual text that I've been reading, there's like proof of that. Someone just literally proved that she was like talking to my soul. And so ever since then, I have traveled the world to kind of understand how does one talk to someone's soul. And I've sort of discovered that we absolutely can do that and so much more. We can literally wield reality. We are like, the analogy I give is we're not just a player in this game playing with game rules that aren't even ours to begin with. They're given to us by society. But that we can actually become the programmer of this game, like to get into the ones and zeros of reality. And that's actually what we're meant to realize that we're capable of. So that's really my passion now. I work with organizations to instill that into their culture, with individuals and founders to instill that into their consciousness. And it's been quite remarkable. I can share many, many miracles as to what happens when you sort of remember that you're the coder.
Yeah, I want to get into some of those stories because those stories help to anchor in what we're speaking about into reality where people can really feel into that. And so I would love to get into that in a bit. But before we do that, I'm kind of set the stage here, based on what you shared in your experience and what you've perceived to be this, grand aspect of yourself, right? Which is really where I feel a lot of people, I guess there's a lot of mind, there's a lot of thought into how
Right.
to create our reality. And there's just, it's very much lived from here and not
Yeah.
from this place right here. And so, what do you feel or what have you perceived to be someone's biggest illusion blocking them from accessing this power that you speak of, and how can they begin to make that shift, which I perceive to be into a shift of actual remembrance, not
Mhm.
conception, not intellectualization, but actually remembrance of who they are as divine beings playing this game.
Yeah, I love it. Your question already had the answer in it, and I think it'll help the readers, listeners, um, to understand how to implement it with a certain context, right? And so the context I always remind people is that reality, in terms of how it works, it's right in front of us. We're living in the simulation or this code, right? And so sometimes it's hard to navigate this if you don't have the ideal context. And so I always remind people that we are energy and we are physical matter at the same time, right? So we know this through like quantum mechanics and physics. And what that means is we are physical matter in a dualistic, separate, I call like physical meat suit reality. And we're also pure energy, which means we're all one, right? So we're 100%, another way to describe it is we're 100% dualistic and 100% non dual, right? And then we must come from the embodiment of 100% separation, ego, dual, sacred meat suit, I call it, and 100% non dual, pure energy, pure vibration. Because if you only operate from one or the other, and this is where a lot of spirituality says, no, 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 this is not the way, this is the way. But and really, when you learn enough of this, it's the entire thing is the way, right? There's no right, wrong, good, bad, positive, and negative. And we're not 50% matter and 50% energy. This is where it's a little tricky for your consciousness to take it that we are 100% matter and 100% energy. And so to start from that context allows a person to realize that, right, another simulation or another metaphor is where the player and the coder at exactly the same moment, right? So as the player, we're going to want to use our intellect to experience, because as soon as you use your intellect and you have thought, and thoughts, for example, have nouns, and every noun is a box. As soon as you name something like computer, chair, desk, you've contextualized it, which is a box, right? You've separated it from everything else. And so as soon as you try to experience reality through your intellect, you're living in the world of separation. And like you alluded to, if we only try to understand, if we just understand enough, that will get to this divine spiritual side, that's the illusion, right? Because it cannot be achieved through the intellect. And so, however, you can't not intellect anything and just go with pure heart, right? This is what some spiritual teachings, what I call New Age Western spiritual teachings, are suggesting. But really, we can't do that, right? And so we really need to get 100% heart and 100% mind to happen at the same time. And this is encoded in a lot of teachings, right? You want to connect your heart and your mind. I think the drawback to that language of connecting your heart to your mind is that it suggests that they're disconnected, right?
Mm.
And they're never disconnected. That it's more like we get to 100% embody the heart and 100% embody the mind. That's a bit more accurate, or remembering is a bit more accurate than connecting, right? Because they're never disconnected, right? And so, and I'll share a fun story with people, and I kind of share this when I was on Josh's podcast, I believe. There was a moment when I was with a partner who's deeply spiritual, and it was the first time in my life I bilocated. Like I was literally on the phone with her, sitting on the couch, and in the same moment swimming in a lake, like physically experiencing it. And the moment I tried to intellectualize it, like what's happening? What does this mean? I stopped bilocating and went back to just being on the phone. And the moment I had no thought, I went back to bilocating. And that was such a great teaching moment, a physical felt experience moment that sometimes you just experience with no thought. The thought is happening, or your perception is happening, but there's no direct intellect that's directing it, right?
Mm.
And so I think for many people, when you learn these esoteric teachings, which I'm sure we'll get into, it's almost like they become the background that's driving things, but your thinking mind is no longer driving, right? You're not intellectualizing and using sentences and stories, basically. You're fully experiencing. And I think it's that state of being that allows us to really get into coding reality.
Mm. Yes, there's so much in everything that you said. And essentially, when we're talking about the heart mind connection, we're speaking about this level of coherence that's happening, this communication, this dialogue between both simultaneously. And how I began to sort of, and of course, as I even decode my own reality and how I perceive it and what's transpiring beneath the surface is that the reality is coming in through the heart. It's that feeling state, and then allowing that to then rise up, and if it needs to be translated through wisdom, through words, through whatever it might be, then it's translated, rather than the top down, which is, I believe, how much of society lives, is through here. It's coming in here, staying here, and maybe never really making it down here. And that interception point where it comes in and kind of moves up and rises and also circulates is
Mhm.
this beautiful coherent field that we're creating. And I would love to go deeper into this idea of coherence, and then also on the back end of that, speaking to, I know a big part of your teachings is Hermetic law and understanding Hermetics, and how what are Hermetics and how do we use Hermetics to actually dive deeper into understanding these concepts, and these different ways in which we relate and create reality.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. From the last 17 years of deep study and practical experience of this, what I found is that the hermetics are like the ones and zeros. If we were in a code, right, it's the hermetics are the ones and zeros, right? They predate all other spiritual teachings and religions. And in fact, when I study all the other spiritual practices or cultural practices, at this point I can say, oh, that framework, that teaching is just these two laws of the hermetics combined. Oh, that one is just these three. It's just literally these seven original laws have infinite permutations that create all the various teachings. And so once I realized that, I was like, oh, you might as well just master the base seven, right? Because if you master the base seven, it's so much easier than thinking there's like 500 different spiritual tips, right? People are chasing tips and tricks. But when you master, and like in martial arts, they say, like, master a few movements. Stop trying to learn like 1,000 different movements. This is the same.
Mm. Yeah, it's really the principles that are distilled within Hermetics, which I'd like to go over with you, and what you, and I know it might be a lot to cover all seven, but we can at least sort of name them out and speak to
Mhm.
each of them briefly, and then maybe take a little bit of a deep
Yeah.
dive into a few of them that really make sense and pertain to this conversation. How does that sound?
Yeah. Great. Great.
Cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, literally, I could speak about these laws for days. They're very deep. And so just to give everyone context, these laws are not fictitious. They were um, deciphered or decoded from what are called the Emerald tablets, right? And these tablets aren't fictitious. It's been documented. Like, humans have had their hands on it. And in fact, Sir Isaac Newton, who we know as a physicist, was the first person to translate it into English, right? Because what most people may not know is that many of the great scientists that we know of were also alchemists. In other words, they
Mm.
studied not only science, physical law, but they also studied spiritual, right? It's one and the same. Alchemy harmonizes science and spirituality, whereas right now it's sort of seen as separate, right? And so, and if you look into the Emerald tablets, if you only believe in modern history, we would say that they're Egyptian, right? Thousands and thousands of years old. If you look beyond modern history and the current narrative, they're Atlantean, which means they're 36,000 years old, right? And so they're much older than a lot of traditional teachings. Just want to give everyone that context. And so there are these seven laws, and yes, every law has infinite layers of interpretation in depth, and each layer starts to sometimes unlock the previous layers. In other words, a deeper layer of understanding can nullify the previous layer, right? And so, because these seven laws, if you only understood them at the superficial level, it actually still just traps you in duality. but at least in this dualistic environment and experience, you understand how things work, right? So you're going to live in this dualistic world, but you'll experience infinite peace because you get how everything happens. But the deeper understanding of these seven laws unlocks you. It's also the key that unlocks you out of dualism, and you now are experiencing non-dual, right? And so I just want to sort of give these larger context before I go into the laws. And so there are seven of them, and I'll just quickly name them, and then we can kind of decide if we want to unpack specific ones. Right. So the first one is the law of polarity. It's actually one of the easiest to apply into your life. Right. And then polarity suggests at the superficial level that there are opposites, right? We need contrast in order to experience our physical world. Right. But and then just for law of polarity, I'm going to go into the third layer. If we skip, the third layer states that you go through two to get to one. And what that means is through a deeper understanding of the law of polarity, you go through the illusion of opposite to only
Mm.
realize that there's a wisdom that you get to realize that makes the opposites no longer opposite. You understand they're just relative degrees of this unifying wisdom. Right? Already in this one law, if you understand a deeper layer, it unlocks itself. Right. So that's a law of polarity. There's a law of rhythm, which just means everything in the universe swings back and forth. Nothing is static. There's a law of cause and effect, right? Which means everything is input output. Nothing is crazy or by accident. Everything is input and output. There's the law of gender, right? Masculine and feminine dynamics, sending and receiving. And sometimes, if masculine, feminine, and for the non-gender people, we can use words sun and moon, right? One is broadcasting and illuminating, and one is reflecting and receiving, right? And there's always this energy happening within us and within people. There's a law of mentalism, which means all things come from thought. There's a law of vibration, which means we're literally in one sea of vibration. And typically I'll say that's like the horizontal understanding of the law of vibration. The vertical understanding is that, the molecule in your fingertip, and these are arbitrary numbers. The molecule in your fingertip, let's say if it's vibrating at 10 hertz, we would say finger, right? Maybe at 20 hertz, the same molecule, we would say spirit. And maybe at 30 hertz, same molecule, we would say God or source. Right. And what that means is we cannot be disconnected from spirit and God and whatever terminology that you would use to speak to spirituality. Right. And that there is no hierarchy. It is you. Right. Because in so many spiritual teachings, they create this hierarchy. And then the law of vibration dissolves the hierarchy and knows
Mm.
that you're never disconnected from it. And then there's the law of correspondence, right? Also known as above, so below. And what that means, and as within, so throughout. What that means is whatever you're experiencing in life is a exact replica of your insides, of mainly your subconscious, right? And so in this law, I go a little bit into neuroscience to help people understand that our thinking brain, our story-making egoic brain, can only process between 8 to 200 bits per second. Our subconscious can process between 200 million to 400 billion bits per second. So clearly, our subconscious mind is running reality, but we
Yep.
don't realize it because our subconscious mind doesn't use stories. So we think our stories, right? This is why a lot of people will try to change their limiting beliefs and they're still stuck in loops. It's because
Yep.
changing your limiting beliefs is still only operating in the conscious layer and not the subconscious, right? And so in the law of correspondence, it's really all about how do you tap into, recognize, and witness and be aware of your subconscious. And that's how you really change your reality, right? So those are the laws, and we can kind of get into any specific ones that is wanting to be
Yeah.
covered.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. You unlocked a lot there, and I love the way in which you really grounded that in. So intuitively, just by tuning into what you shared, I believe in what I feel for the listener and for someone tuning into this conversation. I would say the last law, which law of correspondence in which you shared, would be maybe the first dissection, speaking about the subconscious, which I think is an important realm, and then maybe moving into cause and effect, and maybe speaking from the idea that our consciousness is the cause, right? And the effect is the reality, which is almost correlated in a sense, the correspondence. And then perhaps even deeper than that, the law of vibration and that playing within the infinite quantum field of possibility and potentiality, after we've sort of dissected all of that? How does that feel?
Yeah, great. Yeah,
Okay.
the reason whenever someone asks about the Hermetic laws or principles, I always say law of correspondence last because
I
I found that
recognize
it
that.
is, yeah, it is, it's the, it's funny. I always say like it's my favorite law, even though it's hilarious because I'm in my own practice of non-comparison, and favorite is it's a comparison. And so I find that it is the law that as you really live as, it really helps to unlock reality like the most, right? And so because, for example, these laws are, they're cool to talk about, and they're very esoteric, but always like, how do you actually practice the law? How do you actually live the law? That's really the key, right? Because if you just intellectually understand it and don't live as it, it's a bit useless, right? It just feeds your ego, like, look what I know. And so the way to live the law of correspondence is to recognize, there's many ways. The first easiest way is to recognize your language, right? And again, before I get into it, none of these laws operate independently, right? Most of these laws are stacked upon each other, right? And sometimes all seven laws, right? Your consciousness is decoding from seven laws. Sometimes it's from two, sometimes it's from three or five. So I want to say that, and because what I'm about to say is, when you're mindful of your language, now we're getting to the law of mentalism, right? Which is your thought. And so the language, I'll give an example. Someone that may not be aware of the law of correspondence or the law of mentalism, their words would be, you make me angry. But once you become aware and you live as the law of correspondence and mentalism, your language changes, right? It becomes, instead of you make me angry or you make me happy, it becomes, the anger in me is arising to be aware within me based on what I'm observing in you, right?
Mm.
Or the happiness that's in me is arising to be aware as I observe the actions that you're taking, right? Because the energy in you, right, is corresponding to the external, and so that starts to completely change your experience of your reality, because you're no longer the receiving end of what someone is doing to you. You're, in the language, someone says like, life is not happening to you, it's happening for you. I like to say life is happening, or the universe is happening as you. It literally is a direct correspondence. There's no separation, right? And so that awareness and that language change automatically changes your reality. So anytime that you're feeling a certain thing based on witnessing someone, I tell my daughters, I told them when they were young, if I ever correct you or discipline you or anything, know that it has nothing to do with you. You're just exemplifying a behavior that I have not fully loved within myself.
Mm.
That's all that is, right? And that's the law of correspondence. And so you can imagine just that one context completely changes our relationship, right, in the 3D world, right? So those are some real world applications of the law of correspondence just through languaging.
I like that. And what I sort of, just to break that down further, it's essentially just the shift from our language of being the victim to the language of being the creator, and
Mhm.
owning and claiming our creation through the power of our words, which are magic spells essentially.
Yeah, yeah. And I've spent many years pushing away the victim,
Okay.
meaning I used to judge, right? You don't want to be a victim. And the reason is I grew up with, one of my parents, um, literally living as that 24/7, right? And there's just a beautiful awareness that it was an aspect of myself that I have not yet fully loved, which is why I've been pushing that away for many years. And recently, just literally in the last like 3 to 4 years, I realized that there's a benefit. There's a benefit of everything. Like I tell people, like, we're here to experience the full wave of energy, right? So we have perpetrator, victim, or we could say creator, victim, right? Or, hot and cold, or, you know, kind and mean, right? We're here to experience the full wave. And so for those listening, the victim isn't bad. What it really is that in natural human society programs from mass media, I think all of us have already mastered being the victim. And now we're just going to experience the opposite. My victim isn't bad. It's just like, you spent decades in victim. I think you've played that game to exhaustion.
Yep.
Nothing wrong with it. Let's just play the other half, the opposite, which is creator, right, or perpetrator. And so I just want to make sure that I give that context. There's no judgment of any aspect of this, right? There's no right, wrong, good, bad, positive, and negative. It's just experiencing the what I call the totality of reality, the full wave. So
Thank you for sharing that. One aspect of this law of correspondence I also think is important to sort of dissect and go a little bit deeper into the mycelium network of is the idea of our and actually practical lived experience of decoding our reality through the lens of the subconscious. And
okay.
you spoke very briefly to limiting beliefs and, all these things. And, of course, in the new age, new thought practice, it's very much say these affirmations in front of a mirror and, your reality will change. Well, if you don't fully, there's no certainty or deep belief in that, then it's just words that are not really being anchored deeply in. So maybe any practical application for someone listening around limiting beliefs, limiting stories, identities that we're sort of playing out within our subconscious and how to recode that.
Yeah. Whenever I get questions, I always think about is that the context in which we're going to explore this question the most serving? And oftentimes when I feel into that, I'm like, no, because that context is mass media languaged, right? And so I've said this on so many podcasts that what I found in the last 17 years of deeply attuned to this is that the languaging of mass media um, typically is designed to contract and control us, right? And so, for example, even though I said limiting beliefs, I wanted to use some mass media language. But now that we're going deeper into it, I don't believe that any beliefs are limiting. They're more outdated, right? Because
Mm,
it's a law of rhythm. A belief or a story, if it's held the same, stagnant, and not moving, goes against the law of rhythm. And so it's simply a belief that is outdated. It needs to move. It needs to transmute and bend and slightly change. Because if you had the same belief, I tell people like beliefs are like t-shirts. You don't want to wear one forever, right? It's going to stink. And so you just got to try out a different story or a different belief, right? And so they're more outdated and limiting. And the reason is the moment that you adopted whatever belief that you're wanting to change, that moment, it was the best that your consciousness could do. It was
mm,
not limiting. It was actually expanding in that moment. But now you are a different person than that original story, right? And so now it becomes an outdated story. There's that. And the other is, our subconscious, right? People may not realize it doesn't use words, right? It's not a story. It's pictures, it's movies, right? There's a thing that says a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's how our subconscious works. Now, I'll share a personal story. The first time I really got into the study of the subconscious, this was maybe 14 years ago. I was going through like this relationship thing, and my thinking mind, right, was like pros and cons of the relationship. What's working, what's not working. I'm trying to like story it. And then I was going through this course all about accessing your subconscious, which really is a picture. And when we elicited the picture of my subconscious representation of the story, it was me crawling on grass with rocks everywhere, which is very uncomfortable to crawl on. I was in a bubble, a light bubble. So I could see inside a bubble, but outside of the bubble is completely black. So I can't see anything beyond like 10 feet. And there are boulders to the left, to the right, in front of me. I'm at the back of this bubble, which means I can't back up. So you can imagine that picture, without decoding all the elements, I feel trapped. I don't feel like there's many options. I feel like anywhere or any decision that I make, that I go towards, it's uncomfortable. Literally, that was my subconscious representation. It had nothing to do with pros and cons, right? And that was the subconscious picture that was running the show of this relationship, right? And that's such a powerful example, in my opinion, of how our subconscious has nothing to do with the stories of like, oh, she's this and I'm this and pros and cons and all that stuff, right? And so one of the things that listeners and viewers can start to do is start to pay attention to your language. For example, in many of my friends that are entrepreneurs, when I listen to them talk about their business and in life, they'll use words like, that hit me, I won, basically the language paints a picture of fighting and war. That is the most common subconscious representation I hear a lot of business owners. They treat literally business like a strategic opposition and defense. It's like war, basically. How do you strategize and win and beat the competition? Right. And so that means that their entire life, right, typically is their business, is operating in this subconscious war. And they wonder why they have these, you know, difficult times with their business, because their subconscious, like, if you want a war, you're going to experience a war. There's going to be wins and losses and battles and friction, and you need to strategically plan everything that goes into war. And so if you start to listen to the language of how you speak, it starts to paint the picture of your subconscious, right? For example, another common one people will say is like, I'm under a lot of stress, right? Which means stress is on top of you, that you're carrying the stress. Imagine if you simply just said, I'm on top of a lot of stress, I'm to the left of a lot of stress. That automatically changes to picture,
Mm.
right? So the language awareness literally starts to be the key to understanding through the law of mentalism and correspondence, of course. And then you briefly spoke about the law of vibration. If you were to add into the law of vibration, it's the awareness of the language that you're using and the emotion that you're feeling in that moment. And this
Mm.
is the tougher practice for most people, right? Because we're kind of used to intellectualizing, so we can, think and observe our thoughts a lot easier. But we're also been taught to suppress emotions, right? All of us, when we were young, when we cried, our parents didn't come over and say, "This is amazing, keep crying. Tell me what's going on."
Yep.
Right? They came
Definitely
over
did
and
not
said,
happen.
I don't know of any human that has had that childhood, right? They came over and they simply said either stop crying or what's wrong, right? Immediately trying to get us to stop crying. And so we were taught very young to not show emotion. And we live in a society, I tell people, like, you start crying or getting angry at the office, typically your manager isn't going to come over and say, you know what, you deserve a raise. Thank you for being in touch with your emotions. We don't live in that reality. And so we learn to suppress and repress emotions. And so we are constantly feeling things. We just have learned to block that out so we can think and try to solve and understand to be significant and safe. And so the other practice, the other side of this, of revealing your subconscious and using the law of correspondence, is a practice to be aware of your emotions moment to moment, right? You're going to need
Mm.
the emotions and thoughts together in order to do this.
Mm. There's, as someone who is well intended and practiced within, especially the first part of these words, I had a plant medicine, one of many experiences many years ago. And in this experience, I literally perceived and saw with my mind's eye the words that I was speaking and how they were directed and shaped, and the colors of these words, and all of these different ways in which the words either hurt and harm or they love and amplify. And through that experience, it was a very profound awakening experience because, and I'm of course every day very mindful of how I'm speaking to myself and to others. But of course,
Mhm.
there's still little subtleties and intricacies here. And so I just found it to be very a profound experience and interesting to share in context, because they literally are these spells that are then getting planted like seeds in reality and then spreading from there. At least that's how I perceived it. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, I love that share. So many years ago, I don't remember how many years, doing a meditation, I was shown the same thing, that when we speak a word, every word is a different geometry, right? Think of it as a different shaped Lego piece. And as we continue to speak, these Lego pieces are being stuck together to create the energetic world that we live in, that then densifies, it becomes our physical world. And that the color of each Lego piece is dictated by our emotion, right? And so the word is the geometry, and then the color of the block of Legos or shapes is now dictated by our emotions. And so through that combination, as we speak and feel, we're literally creating this reality. And the best part about this is I have a friend who has synesthesia, which means she innately was born with the ability to see and taste sound. And so
Oof.
she verified this. When people speak, she can literally see sonic geometry coming out of it, and she can actually even taste it. Yeah. So that's
Wow.
literally how reality works. Yeah.
That is profound. To take this another step deeper here, words, emotions, vibration, and
Mm-hmm.
now from actually, because we're all a resonance field, right, is around us. Our auric field is creating this resonance, and that resonance is either incoherence or perhaps it's distorted, and it's all sort of happening all at once. When we are maybe speaking to the masculine and feminine of this, in the sense that what I have been going through as of late, and just as a vulnerable share to maybe open this conversation, is that so much of the program that's been running in the subconscious in my personal reality for so long has been the hyperactivity, productivity, doing state, which pretty much all of the world finds ourselves in. Our nervous system, or our electric system, as you explained it, is very much in this state of just on and just moving, whereas we've neglected the feminine. But right now, as I perceive in the greater context of not only this earth, but just reality in general, the feminine energy is rising, and it's asking us to be more in that void space of being before ever taking action into the doing. And how that is actually how reality is created, from the void, from that empty space, and then actually taken out and placed through our excitement, through our joy, through our action, that's
Mm-hmm.
in alignment with what it is we received in that void space. That, I don't know why that wanted to come out, but I trust it. Maybe you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. 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 No, that's such an important topic at this time, because what you're offering to everyone is a very common um, Western New Age teaching right now. And what we get to do is we get to alchemize it a bit to make it a little bit more comprehensive, right? And so, in modern understanding, the way it's contextualized, a lot of people believe that being is inaction, right? You're just sitting there doing nothing. You're just being. You, I always remind people, you're always inhaling and exhaling. There's always action happening,
Yep.
right? And so we need to discern, is being inaction and then doing is action. I don't believe that that context is serving. The way I look at it is, being is actioning from complete full expression with awareness of who and how you're feeling without an attachment to an outcome. That's
Mm,
being. Whereas doing is typically unaware of how you're feeling, and you're very attached to an outcome, right? And now I want to give an example of this. I would say this example, I don't know why it comes, but I'll say, when kids know how to be, right? Kids are just present and they're just playing. By a little hint, they're playing all the time. If a kid wanted to ride a swing, they would just ride a swing. These days, as an adult, they would ride a swing because they read that it increases your HRV and your Aura Ring score and your readiness by 20 points, right? They attach it to an outcome. And so what we're speaking to, which many indigenous wisdom keepers have now shared with the world, they say, children are our future. Now, you can take that literally, as in our kids will grow up to be, positions of leadership, and that'll be the future. But all things are decoded. We can decode things. What they really mean is the child in us, right? The sense of play and wonder and the sense of presencing is the future. Right. And so what we're really looking at, to expand upon the masculine feminine dynamic, is we get to be in a position and embrace a state of being where we don't have to know and understand anything, that we can be guided from the complete void of all possibilities, and that we action purely from a chosen state. Right. And just to speak a little bit into the state, we are programmed to be productive and efficient. That awareness of those two things needs to be acknowledged, that we are programmed to be productive and efficient, because school was made to make obedient factory workers, not enlightened children, right? So any of us that went through traditional school and we live in mass society, productive and efficient, right? Whenever someone says, what's the best way to do something? We automatically think what's the straightest line and the shortest path to get to that thing, right? And so we want to recognize this, because if we're living in productive and efficient, that means the state of being we're always in is a bit of like on behind, and a little bit of vigilance, a little bit of almost worried that we're not going to get there, right? And
Mm,
we also live in, of course, the grand illusion of you're not there yet, right? And all this is designed to program us to stay on the hamster wheel, basically, to be the productive force to move the economic engine along, to make those that are truly in control of us even more wealthy, right?
mm,
So we get to recognize that game first and foremost, because once we recognize that game and we've got it, why don't I play a different game? That the game, the current narrative of amass enough resources and then you will be significant and safe is completely just one game to play, right? Again, I tell my daughters, you can do the American lie, I call it. You can spend the next 40 years after you graduate to make enough money to retire, languaging, to tire again, right? Or you can spend the next 5 years saving 10 people's lives. Guarantee you for the rest of your life, whatever you need, those 10 people will say, I've got you. Different game, right? And so
mm.
we have infinite games that we get to play. First and foremost, we need to call out, you don't have to all try to win the game of amass enough stuff to be significant and safe using these spiritual practices, because you're still living inside that game, right? So we got to first and foremost choose the game that you want to play. The game that I like to choose, it's all about self-awareness, and there is no danger. If I die the next moment, I'll just come back if I want to and play this game again, right? There's no need. I never lock doors. For years, I've never locked the door at my house, my car. Now that everyone knows, feel free to come and take stuff. So, because I just choose not to live in that reality. Like if someone wanted to take my stuff, you can take it. In fact, so the drawback to this is one time I did leave for weeks and I had thousands of dollars of equipment in my car that I left unlocked and it was stolen. And when I got back, I was like, oh, well, it's just stuff, right? It's a different game. And so first and foremost, we get to recognize that the game that we're playing doesn't have to be the mass media game. And within that, of course, we get to now play and fully express who and what we are without inhibition and without an attachment to an outcome. This is the future. And we're all heading towards this, whether people want to, like to, or work towards or not. It is happening.
It is indeed. And we can either scratch and claw our way, there, or we can
Yeah.
actually embrace it. And I like the idea of embracing it more than trying to grip onto the old.
Yeah.
And it feels as if there's a massive shift upon us right now, and we are at that dawning hour of just very much incredible things that are on the horizon. And I choose to also create and command a reality that is of beauty and is of peace. Now, of course, right now, as we see the world, the shadows, the secrets being exposed and needing so to be able to be illuminated by the light so that we can all begin to play this bigger game. And
Mhm.
I guess that leaves us at this point where we've really gone into these different micro topics, all very much interconnected and related to each other. Is there
Mhm.
anything that perhaps I have left out in any way that would sort of wrap this conversation together in a coherent way where people now take this away and really apply this to a lived direct experience?
Yeah, yeah. There is actually. And we kind of touch upon that a little bit. So again, it goes back to, I like to use those Russian nesting doll as a framework, right? And so we talked about some of the inner dolls, right? The hermetics and the mass media programming and how to apply the different laws, sort of in this life. But the outer doll, the outermost doll that we are in needs to be recognized, right? And the outermost doll that we are programmed into is, I call it the gap, right? Basically, you're not there yet. And
Yeah.
so every message of marketing that people have consumed, which is billions of imprints. Like literally, I don't know if people realize, every billboard you've driven by, that literally even going 60 miles per hour, you weren't like staring at it. It was just like a flash. That image, that has been programmed into your subconscious. Right. And so this is how powerful our subconscious is. And so you can imagine we've consumed billions of imprints of marketing. And what does marketing do? Marketing says you're not there yet until you buy our product or service. That's every marketing message. Right. And so again, we get to laugh at at the controlling mechanism and the illusion of you're not there yet that we lived in. And that we get to switch that outer doll from you're not there yet to, of course you're already there. Right? In fact, you are a divine being, your energy, which means you are everything and everywhere, right? In other words, you're not like a little bit of Rumi. You're not just a drop in the ocean. You're the entire ocean in a drop. And so you are all of reality. And so if you are all of reality, there's nowhere to go because you are everything. And so I think it's really important for people to understand and live as that you are already their energy. It's a whole different energy. And from there, you can literally start to create any game that you want, right? And even in spirituality, right? They don't realize they're in the game of not there yet. I need to unlock all of my chakras. I need to have my Kundalini awakening. I need to do another plant medicine to get it's still the you're not there yet energy. And
Based
there's
on
something,
improvement.
yes, right? It's the you're not good enough, right? You're not there
Mhm.
yet. And so when you start to live like I'm already there, now your vibration feels completely different. You're just now exploring what is versus trying to get somewhere. And I
Mm.
think that context needs to be spoken out because it dictates everything. That's the outer doll. You can do the hermetics, you can do all kinds of spiritual things and do all the things, but if you're still operating within the outer doll of you're not there yet, guess what? You're always going to feel not there yet. And then there is no final carrot, I tell people. There is no final, like people who are trying to heal their wounds. I mean, I treated 9,000 patients in 20 years. I've never met anyone and spoken to thousands of entrepreneurs and people of high influence who are on this path of healing. I've never met anyone that says, yep, I've healed my final wound, right? Entrepreneurs, I've never met any entrepreneur that says, yep, I've made my last dollar. I'm out of the game, right? Because it's a never ending carrot, right? Because we're divine beings. As soon as we set the intention to be on a path, we will create that path in perpetual. It will never end because we're infinite creators, right? And so there is no end to if I just have this, then I'll be enough. You simply just choose, I'm enough. I'm already there. It's just a simple choice. And that's our divine right to do. And so I think it's really important to kind of call that out like, hey, you are already there. And all of this is just an exploration. It's not an achievement.
Mm. And therefore, what I perceive, and I believe you alluded to this in your interview with Josh, was the way in which now you express and even and bring people together and teach or share is different
Mhm.
because from that energy, then
Yeah.
it's not the classical "you're not there, you need improving, fixing, changing, etc." It's we come into the recognition of the wholeness that's already within, and
Yeah.
even again how we show up. And this is something that I've been also contemplating as someone that leads groups, that leads experiences and
Mhm.
guides people. Am I still doing it from that outdated place, or am I doing it from a place of I'm just being the resonance of who I am and claiming that in this moment and allowing that resonant field to then share and do whatever it needs to with the people there for them to drop into their wholeness?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've been thinking about this for years, and then in the last 12 months, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna implement it. And I was on a yeah, I mean, I told the story on Josh's call, which is there was a woman that wanted to come to one of the experiences at her run. She's like, what's in it for me? She's basically wanting me to sell her, like, hey, you're gonna get this and that, and these are the benefits, and that's how it's gonna change your life. And I said to her on the call, I was like, well, I don't know what benefits you're gonna have because I'm just doing this to be all of me. I'm gonna gather people I love to play with, and they're gonna experience all of me, and we'll see what happens, right? And she was like, "Okay, I'm coming." And so it was like, oh, it really helped me instill right this updated belief that people are ready for this resonance, that you're just entering my field, and that's it, right? And we
And
leave all possibilities open. So
Mm, I absolutely love that, and it very much resonates with one of the Gene Keys teachings. I don't know how familiar you are with the Gene Keys, but in Gene Key 26, which is the gift of artfulness, it shares around the idea of heart marketing, which is much different than what we've talked about in traditional marketing. And of course, this is a whole rabbit hole in itself, which is off topic, but just very much reminded me of what we were just sharing there. And so, yeah, I really appreciate your energy, your wisdom, everything that you shared and expressed here today. If there's anything else that you would leave the audience with, feel free to share anything else that is resonant and alive for you right now.
yeah, yeah, I think the most valuable thing in the world is space. So because without space, you can't experience anything. And so my parting wisdom would be to give yourself space, not only like your time schedule space, but space to feel. Right? It goes back to, in other words, if you're feeling resentful, guilt, anger, right? They're no good or bad. Give yourself space to feel those feelings and explore those feelings with complete self-love and acceptance. Because I think there's a hint of the teachings, the New Age Western spiritual teachings, I call it, where there's a bit of judgment. Like, oh no, you need to get out of anger, you need to get out of shame, you need to get out, you need to get away from it. And so there's like a subconscious, again, hint of bad emotions and good emotions. And I like to realize, sort of help people remember there are no good and bad emotions. They're just different energies. Right. And so I think the first and foremost is, as you're exploring everything that we've talked about, you're going to have a lot of different emotions come up, and just give yourself space and allowance and full acceptance to feel whatever feeling is coming up without judgment.
Oh, I love that. That's feeling is the key. It's the unlock on such a deep level. So thank you for again your wisdom and for sharing. And for people that want to find you, maybe journey with you in any way, how can they do that?
Well, I mean, they can find me on Instagram. It's just Stephen with a V, Stephen Young Alchemist, and just kind of reach out. One thing I did was I did share with Josh's community. Maybe I can just send you the link to a Hermetics course that I literally channeled. Literally, it was 11 o'clock at night one night, and I was being told to get in front of a camera, and for the next 4.5 hours, I spoke out the Hermetic principles in ways that's deeply easy to understand, and with real world, like how do you practice them and live as the laws. And so, maybe I can send that link that you can offer to the people that are viewing.
That would be wonderful. I'm sure people would very much appreciate that. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And yeah, until next time, brother, thank you for all your wisdom and looking forward to chatting again.
Yes.